Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. I thought we'd start by having you say your name and spell your last name for us.
Virginia Sather, S-A-T-H-E-R.
Thank you. My name's Robert Bauman, and today's date is October 16th, 2013. And we're recording this interview on the campus of Washington State University, Tri-Cities. So I wonder if we could start by having you tell me what brought you to Hanford, when you came here, why you came.
Well, I was working at a Navy hospital near Los Angeles, California, in what they call ship service. It's a PX in the Army. And I was more or less recruited to work in the PX at Hanford Recreation Building. And in that building they had a beer hall and a soda fountain and a 10-pin bowling alley and the PX. Just kind of a service place for everything was based on the Army. The barracks and mess halls, and it's all Army language. I'd been used to Navy language. And I called my sister and was telling her about it in Des Moines, Iowa, where I was born and raised. And, she said, that sounds good. You know, they told us they'd pay our way out, and your room and board would be furnished in your pay. And if you stayed at least 4 months, you got your way paid back. So we thought, well, we could try for 4 months. Her husband had just been in the medical corps, and he'd been in the European theater, and at that time they were sending some European theater people over to the Japanese theater, and she was going to be alone anyway, maybe till the end of the war. So she said, well, let's do it. So that's what we did. Came into Pasco in the middle of the night with the train, and next morning came out, taken out to Hanford and processed and all, just everything, just click, click, click. And we got used to standing in line for everything, and I don't mean a little line, I mean like lines we'd never seen before, blocks long. One grocery store, one drugstore, one Sears order office, just one of everything for 50, 60,000 people. That would be like having one of everything in Kennewick. So, I don't know, her husband, then his orders were changed, as sometimes happen in the military. At the last minute, he was actually on a ship going over to the Pacific area, and they changed, and he was sent back to the States. So she stayed her 4 months. By that time, she got this notice, and she left, so that I was on my own by then. And I just thought, well, I'll just stick it out because it's a pretty good job, and I met my husband-to-be, and I don't know, we kept thinking, well, when the war's over, we'll be laid off. The time came and went, and we didn't get laid off, and they shut down some reactors, and we said, well, we're going to be laid off. At that time, I was working in the fuels production section for N reactor, and my husband was the manager in fuels production for the older reactors, what they call the ALSI fuels. So we said, we're going to be laid off. They shut down the reactors, but they just took the ALSI people and transferred them over to my section, and I'm the one that got laid off. Our people got laid off. But I didn't actually get laid off because we were on a excess list, and there was another opening in research and development, so I went there, and then they dismantled that in 3 years. So then I went out to N reactor. So I was actually in several reactor areas, in all the production separations areas. So when one door closed, another one opened up, and I just was flexible enough to go with the flow. And here I am 40 years later. Well, actually, I worked 40 years, so it's 70 years later, because I've been retired for 30 years.
What were your? Do you remember your first impressions when you coming from Los Angeles to Pasco and then
Well, of
Richland?
course, areas surrounding Los Angeles is actually semi-desert. And, of course, everything was dug up, so there was just dust everywhere, just heavy equipment everywhere, the whole 600 square miles. And there was a lack of a lot to do because the hospital where I worked was about 40 miles. It had been a former country club, so and the Navy took it over and had indoor pools, outdoor pools, golf course, and the whole 9 yards. So there was lots to do, and on the weekends we'd go into L.A. or wherever, Hollywood or everywhere. Sometimes clear to San Diego if we could. You know, transportation was very scarce during the war. Mm-hmm. Find somebody who had gas and hitch a ride. And yeah, that was my first impression. I guess I was like most people. I must have missed something when I was in my geography class in grade school because like a lot of people, I was looking for forests and mountains and I saw. But I was used to flat coming from Iowa, you know, but of course there's lots of woods in Iowa. But I guess being young, I don't know what was I, 21. I guess I was 21. You know, I was very flexible. I had changed jobs different times before, and I guess I was kind of adventuresome. For those times. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes the older people criticized me because by the time I was 21, I'd been in several states. Mm-hmm. One summer, my cousin and her husband had a carnival that went all over the South and Midwest. And they took me on one summer, and I traveled with that carnival. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I just got used to making do, also just making do, you know, not expecting any luxurious places to stay or anything like that. Just so, you know, it was primitive. The barracks were just bare floors and cots and a washroom. They were H-shaped, so the cross in the center was the washrooms and the barbed wire all around. Looked more like a prison camp, actually. I know when we moved to Richland, and they had a prisoner of war camp out on the Yakima River near the dam, Horn Rapids, near there. And we went to Benton City by way of that road one time, and we saw that. And I said, "Oh, look, it looks like the Hanford, original Hanford." Yeah, it's kind of primitive, but I don't know. I think young people nowadays may be kind of spoiled. I don't know whether they would really put up with that. That's what we put up with then.
Did you? You said you were sort of recruited. Did you? I mean, what were you told about Hanford? Did you know what was being?
Well, actually, they talked to me first about Alaska, and then even before I talked to my sister about it, a recruiter called me and said, "Oh, the weather has been so bad up there, they put a stop to everything for a while. But I've got this place that's just as good in eastern Washington. And there's going to be a lot of young people. Turned out there's a lot of old people, too, because the middle-type people were in the Army or in the military. And, of course, there was probably 100 men to every female. There were just very few women. And mostly because of the housing, because a lot of women in those days would be married by that time. And if they came, it was the same situation. You still had to be separated in the barracks. And the men didn't like that at all, so they'd go to Yakima or Walla Walla or someplace searching for housing. But the women liked it, because the housekeeping was all done for you. Beds were made, the linens were changed, the bathroom was cleaned, and you had the mess hall, all the food you wanted at the mess hall. And the men, I think the women really liked it. The women, of course, I was not married, didn't have any children, but the ones that did, I think they thought it was kind of a vacation. But,
and how long did you stay in the dormitories then?
Well, the dormitories were in Richland, so...
Oh, the barracks.
Yeah, we can't say dormitories because they weren't that fancy. They built in Richland for the operation people. That's the people's going to stay. And they must have opened in 45. Down on Lee Boulevard, one of the buildings is still there on the corner across from the Federal Building. That was the cafeteria. Then they all down Lee and Knight Street, where they had the post office and the bank. They were two-story dormitories. And I never lived in there because by that time I was married. So then we were assigned a house in Richland.
How long were you in the women's barracks?
Oh, October 43, 44, pretty close to 2. They closed out Hanford like about right after the war was over. We got our house in 44, and I know I was commuting for a while to Hanford, probably a year and a half. And then we got a house. Couldn't get any houses till probably late 44. We got a house in Richland, and we were there 10 years, and then we built a house in Kennewick up by the mall, and we've been there ever since.
You said you met your husband here. How did the two of you meet, and what was he working?
Well, people laugh when they hear this story. I have one girlfriend still left from my graduating class, same age I am. She lives in Manhattan Beach, so when I was in California, she'd gone out with her folks after high school because of the airplane factories, and so we kept in touch, and I saw a lot of her and everything, and she asked my husband about it one time. She asked him, she said, "What did you like about Ginger?" I was known as Ginger when you first met her, and he said her spirit. And Betty Jean said, "Have you got enough spirit yet?" He said, "Just about." I think we'd been married about 50 years by then, and we're coming up on 70 now. But I don't know. It's I was on an afternoon shift at that time, and afternoon shift we worked 6 days, 10 to 12-hour days. Supposed to be 10, but people didn't show up or they were gone. People just disappeared. The rules and everything was so strict, and security was so strict that even after we moved into Richland, neighbors would just disappear, especially if they had unruly children. Any little infraction or anything like that, you could disappear. And the FBI, they had total control. It was really, like some third world country there for a long while until the city was sold in 58. Your boss or the top guy in DuPont or General Electric, United Nuclear, any temp, they could not, caught with a weapon or drinking or any type of malfeasance. I mean, you just disappeared. I mean, no 30-day notice or anything. Looked up, the house was empty, or maybe you'd look out and see a moving van. Yeah, it was strict. Well, anyway, we would have a 10 or 12-hour shift. So they had 8 mess halls. They could serve 5,000 people in each one of those at a time. And the only one that was 24 hours was number 8. So usually you'd go with some of your coworkers there after your shift. So he was there. There'd been a guy about the age of my father who would come in when there was spare time. He'd talk to me there at the register at the PX, and he kept telling me, "I got this roommate, this fella, he's about your age, and I think you should meet him." And I kept thinking, oh my God, what's he trying to palm off on me? And he kept it up and kept it up, and I kept telling him I was busy or I was booked up or something, you know, I think. But anyway, I got caught dead. He came over to my table at this mess hall in the middle of the night after the end of our shift. I think we got off at midnight that night. And he came dragging this poor guy over. You could tell he didn't want to come. He just had a hold of him and actually pulling him over. And my husband's 6'3" and 189 pounds. This guy, Reardon, his name was Reardon. He says, "This is Dick Sather." And I told him you wanted to meet him. Oh, I'm telling you. It's a good thing there was the rules. And so I said, "Not particularly." And he went on, and so I said, "Well, don't you want him to sit down and visit?" I said, "Not particularly." I remember everything it said. People still tease me about it. Not particularly. My husband the same color than I am, but his face still turned red. And of course he didn't know what to do. You know, young, naive boy. He's 6 months older than I am. Anyway, so the next time they both came over to my register. Of course they bought some, I don't know, shaving lotion or something. Anyway, so then my husband started coming in. Then it graduated till we went over and sat down in the soda pop place and had soda pop and visited. Well, that went on for about 3 weeks, and I didn't find out very much later that my husband-to-be was dating a gal, and he was booked up for this time, and so he was just playing it cool till he could get rid of this other gal, evidently. So anyway, I found that out even after I was married. This guy who got us together told me that, and so then we started, if you could call it, dating up there when somebody drops you off in the middle of the night at a barbed wire fence with a guard, like. But they had buses going to Walla Walla, Pasco, and Yakima, and it cost you a nickel. And they said they had to charge that because of the insurance rules. So on your day off, which usually we got 1 day off, we would go see a movie, have dinner, and we'd go back to our barracks. And it went like that. And so he bought me a ring. I think it was in March. I met him in January, I think. December. I met him in December, I think. And we were engaged, and then we were married. Well, I didn't want to get married. He said, "When do you want to get married?" I said, "When I'm about 30. I was thinking about 30. So then he started talking about, well, he was going to go to Alaska and all this and that and the other. And so we had it set for May. My mother-in-law for years still sent my anniversary card in May, but they actually got married in June because I changed the date twice. We got married in June, so in coming June I'll be married 70 years. But that's how we met. And he's just the opposite of me. I'm a Class A, he's a Class B. He's a mostly Norwegian, and he's pretty laid back. You know, he's one of these, whatever you want, do what you want. Yeah, it's worked out very well. And he's not here with me now because he's lost his memory. Because he could tell you some tales too.
You talked about the buses going to Yakima and Walla Walla for entertainment, and was there ever entertainment on site at all?
No, the surrounding communities did not cater to us at all. You know, now you go to a convention or some big thing and the town will have sales signs and discounts at the restaurants and do everything to welcome you. No, they were very, very provincial. Well, so many of them either got displaced or knew or had a relative or somebody who was displaced because these towns were just 7 miles apart. And they were all, you know, the families in those times were practically incestuous, you know. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean they just were cousins and aunts and uncles, and Had to be careful because I might be talking to the wrong person. But no, they, although they tried to make all the money they could, divided their house just like they did in California and still do, to illegal housing, turned the garage into a room and did everything to make money off of you. They didn't turn any of that down, but no, the natives, they were not friendly. A lot of people remarked on that. We were intruders, and I can see their point of view. We were tearing up their land, their orchards and their vineyards and their little mint fields, which is all the world to them. You know, people back in those days had never really been out of the county. People didn't travel till the wartime. They didn't marry outside. Of course, with the wartime, they not only married people from another state, they married them from another country. But my time, of course, that was just unheard of till wartime. And the only ones that were halfway decent that could think outside the box enough to see that it was for the war effort, even though they didn't know what it was. They just took it in their stride. But by and large, no. And we later got personally acquainted and socially visited with some of the old-timers here, that the John Dam Plaza, the John Hazel Dam. He actually came from Norway, but he'd lived here most of his life. He came here as a young man, but there were several people like that. He had a store, general store there on George Washington Lane. And, no, it was, and I found out that this went on all over where people were displaced, with maybe not on that scale, but I mean, an airplane factory went in, or a shipyard went in, or something was expanded and they got displaced because the government had the right of domain. And I think during the war, the president had all the executive powers that were ever heard of.
You mentioned that at some point you were able to get a house.
Yeah.
Where was that, in Richland, and what sort of housing were you able to get then?
Got a house. It was a prefab, and I think I gave them to the Historical Society down at the museum, where they came in sections, I think from Portland. And we were in that a little while, and I got up, it was December 1st, turned out to be the coldest day of the year, and I smelled smoke. And they had heaters in the wall, 220 heaters in the wall. And then they had 220 wiring that ran in little inside of wood. Everything was plywood. And it was treated with a propellant of some type, varnish or something. So it really went up fast. So then we got a pre-cut. And pieces like trusses and all were made in Spokane in a mill and then came down and put together. There are not very many of those. One was 2-bedroom and one was 3-bedroom. So we were in that for a while until we built our house. 5 years, I guess, until we built our house. But when they did the fire investigation, they found out that's what it was electrical. I went in to grab some stuff out of the closets, and they didn't have closet doors, so we just had like drapes across there. And they were on fire, but I just overreacted, and I grabbed the hangers, which in those days were all wire, and I had blisters all over my hands, and all my hair in the front, my eyebrows were burnt off. So then we got this other house, this pre-cut, and then the investigators came to us and showed us that, and then they went around to all those prefabs and rewired them all after that, because they said the houses they rewired, they found scorch marks in there. So there could have been a lot more fires. Yeah. So your name just kind of came up. A lot of it was supposed to be your position. When they built the stick houses out here on the north end, and right here, Harris Street, where they ended. And they started up there in Uptown. They started building Well, up there about by Jefferson School, they started past there building stick houses. They all went to management or up here on Harris. And in '58, when they sold the land, all that land was bare out there. And mostly people who got the land, maybe they could afford it. I don't know why, but a lot of them said it was politics. But it was dentists and doctors and lawyers. But it was known Davidson and Harrison, these streets out here, they were known as Pill and Drill Hill. Because of the doctors and the dentists out there. So a lot of it was by your position, a lot of it the size of the family, and a lot of it, I think, just political, who you knew. If you knew somebody in the housing office, you really had it made. But your name would come up on a list, and they'd give you like 3 places to look at. And you'd choose one.
When did you find out exactly what Hanford's purpose was that it was involved in production of?
Well, I was at work, and I don't remember now who it was. I was working in security at that time. I worked in security 2 different times. Early on, and then when they had the expansion and built what they called the Cold War reactors, they were going to have to process thousands of construction workers and support services out at North Richland, so I moved out there to North Richland and processed. Atkinson Jones was the prime contractor, processed all these people. So I was downtown. This was my first security job. The building's been torn down since. It was down in the region of the Federal Building, next to the 703 building that was the head of the Federal Building. I think it was my boss, Roy James. Came in and said, and the people kind of didn't quite believe him at first, there in the offices. And then, of course, I saw the newspapers, or at first the local paper, the Villager, and it didn't really surprise people too much. You know, I think after they heard, especially if you transferred around a bit. But I know I was told I asked too many questions.
So you worked in security a couple different times. So what other sorts of jobs did you have?
Well, first when I went out there, my very first at the rec hall, New Hampshire, I was classified as a clerk. And then, where did I go from there? Oh yeah, and then of course, then I was moved down to Richland for security, and then I went to 300 area to the instrument division. Then I went out to the hog and dog farm. When Battelle came and took over the Hanford laboratories, and I was in the laboratory building, I wasn't in the reactor building, that was F reactor. They put up a big welcome sign there by the gate to F area, and it said, "Welcome, Battelle," because they had so many sheep out there they were testing. Well, then I asked for a transfer out of that because I started getting nauseated. And, I was up there where they opened these, just like the steam where they just kind of boiled these rats and stuff. They were trying to find out how much of that contamination would be in the bones. They had doctors, vets there and everything like that. And I kept telling my supervisor, I said, I don't think I can do this. And he said, it's probably something else. Well, I was going out to the bus area, picking up the bus every morning, and it was in May, so I wasn't wearing a coat, because May can be pretty hot here. And I could see these other workers looking at my abdomen, And I think they thought it was morning sickness, but it wasn't to be for a long time. But anyway, I knew what he was thinking. But I said, you know, in every area had a first aid station. I said, well, I go over to the first aid station, and I said, the minute, and I put off going out over there because, you know, you had to dress. You had booties and white coat and all that on. And I said, I get out in that fresh air and I'm fine. And I go back in. It was on the 4th floor. Well, after I left there, sometime after, I guess enough people complained that they changed their ventilation system. But I know that's what it was because I'm just kind of sensitive to scents anyway.
And so what sort of work what tasks did you have there?
Oh, well, of course they had all these precious metals, and they had gold, and they had silver, and they had alcohol, and all the supplies, everything. I even ordered dogs from the pound in Yakima had to be a certain size, and pigs. We had to have pigs a certain size. Just supplies. What did they call me? Buyer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I had to keep track of all this, and they audited me on it. And because, you know, it wouldn't be past people to try to take alcohol, particularly. Mm-hmm. And so all the supplies, ether, all kinds of stuff. And of course your regular office supplies, or medical supplies, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I did that. Well, then I got transferred out of there, and I went out to 200 areas to the separations building, and I was secretary there. And then when I went out to BC, reactor, end reactor, and research and development, all those places, I was executive secretary. I went to night school at CBC. And then I was administrative assistant. And then I retired. I was a specialist education, training, and development. Wrote training manuals and conducted training, made overhead displays and all kinds of stuff like that. So I just kind of a Jill of all trades.
You say you had number of different positions, and yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, they just asked me if I could do it, and I said yes. And then I'd run home and call anybody I knew and say, "How do you do this?" Brush up on it.
Of the different positions you had, did you have one that you enjoyed the most, that you really enjoyed, and maybe one that was sort of most difficult or challenging?
Well, I forgot there too. In between, I was in employee relations, and they wanted somebody to go to labor relations who was not connected with any union member. This was during the strike. I believe it was 63. It was a 3-month strike of all the craft people. Those were trying times. And, of course, nowadays with all the technology, it's hard to believe how they operated back then. But, you know, the union would get a proposal, type it up, take it to the employee relations people, and they'd study it and send back an answer, and back and forth and back and forth. So I really, for the first time in a long time, was working overtime because they would be meeting long into the night sometimes. But they and I guess I was one of the few women who wasn't connected. I know all my friends, most of them were married to craft people, and my husband was a manager of maintenance at that time. And so anyway, I did that till the end of that. That was a temporary assignment. But then that's, I guess, how I got into the education, training, development, because that was part of employee relations. So I was pretty flexible, and also In my studies, I learned that when you work a long time a place, they're not going to get, I said 3 years. They're going to get much more out of you, and you're not going to get much more out of them. In other words, you're going to get complacent. You're not going to grow that much. And the longest I was any place was at Pyrex. That was the newest separations plant. I was there 6 years. And when I left there, the boss got mad at me because he was on vacation when I took the job out to BC Reactor. But you know, they had a little thing going on that when jobs would come up, they didn't want you to move. They'd never tell you about it. There was no posting. Now posting is required. And we finally got posting to be required. Well, the man who took his place when he was on vacation, he came back from a staff meeting, and when he came back from staff meeting, he had me type up his meeting minutes for him so he could turn them over to my boss when he came back after 2 weeks. Oh, I said, I'd like to interview for this job. It was a one-rate hire because that was another thing. Your job was tied in with your manager's rate. You couldn't advance if you stayed with the same person unless he advanced. And there was a time or two when my boss advanced and I advanced with him. But normally you're just stuck. It doesn't have anything to do with your job description or anything. Now, the exempt people, it was different. They had a bunch of requirements and it was all rated and so many points signed, this and that and the other, and you'd be at level 12, almost like the federal ratings. You'd be at level 12 or 15 or whatever. But the people working for them, the non-exempt people working for them, no. So anyway, I went out there and interviewed, and he said, well, you got the job. And I said, well, don't you have other people interview? He said, well, yes, but he said, I'm giving you the job. And I said, well, then he said, I'm going to take you down the hall and introduce you to the rest of my staff. I said, of course, I'd been training managers for a long time. I said, you can't do that. You know, you're going to have to go ahead and either interview or not interview or something. You can't just all of a sudden drop this on people. Oh, he said, thank you. He's the boss. I had to change a lot of his letters. He was Scotch and he had this temper and he'd fire off letters and everything, and I'd put them in the bottom drawer. Sometimes I wouldn't even transcribe them. They'd lay there for a while. Sometimes he'd come in and say, what about that letter to that dude over in such and such an area? I said, oh, I've been so busy, I just haven't got around to it yet. Oh, he said, thank you. Because usually he'd fire it off to somebody that he shouldn't have, somebody at a higher level. He was so funny. But anyway, I got that job, and then after that, they had to, after the civil rights legislation and all this equality and all this business, these federal jobs had to put quarterly reports into some committee in Washington, D.C. about what they were doing to even the playing field. And here they were saying they were posting jobs and they were doing this and that and the other, and just imagine these people typing up these reports and sending them in and everything, knowing a lot of it was a big lie. So finally they revolted, and they were so scared they were going to join the union that they would do most anything to keep the white-collar people out of the union. So finally they changed it and started posting the jobs. But before there was just quite a bit about who you knew or who you happened to run into, or maybe just by the grapevine to find an opening. So they had to quit doing that. But I thought, here these people, a lot of them have masters and PhDs. How stupid could they be? Don't they think we read what we type up? It was so funny. It was so funny. There was enough levity from time to time to make it interesting. There were practical jokes and things like that went on.
Earlier you talked about the emphasis on security. You worked in security and secrecy. and you talked about the FBI sort of having a presence, and were you all aware of that? I mean, it was a real focus, and
We got reminded all the time, and all the water plants and the where my friend there I'm talking about in California who worked a long time for Hughes Aircraft, they had big signs up and everything about the enemies listening and, you know, all this kind of stuff, and pictures and little cartoons. And, yeah, you were just reminded of it in a subtle fashion all the time. But now, just like when I married, I looked up one day and there's two FBI men there standing at my desk. I think I was coming back from the lunchroom and they were waiting for me. And they started questioning me, and I said, well, I never planned to change my name. Well, of course, that was unheard of way back then. I mean, it's common now. But they said, well, you know, there's a law. You're going to have to change it. Well, I'd already researched it. Not that I'm smarter than the FBI, but I think you should get your facts before you expose yourself. And they never was a law. It was like, you know, something borrowed, something blue. It was tradition. And so I said, show me the law. So then they came back again a little bit later and said, you're going to have to change your name. And I don't know what they were all excited about because my husband worked here and had clearance and everything. And I said, well, it's not the law. And they said, no, but it's our policy. And it's job requirement. I said, well, when I hired in, I didn't see any such requirement on my papers. They said, well, it's there now. So I let it go for a while, and my husband said, oh, don't hassle it. Don't worry about it. He said, I know your name's as good as my name. He said, just don't hassle it. So I guess he thought he might get fired. So anyway, I changed my name, changed my badge and all, and I had to fill out umpteen papers again, the personnel security questionnaire. Everybody had to fill out 7 copies. You remember, you wouldn't know trying to make 7 copies on a manual typewriter, carbon paper. You had to start wearing dresses that were either navy blue or black because you get this carbon all over you. It was something else. So that's my closest encounter with the FBI.
You also earlier talked about how, you know, during the war there was bare bones, there really wasn't any entertainment, and the town wasn't necessarily especially welcoming. Did that change after the war?
Yes, I think they knew what side their bread was buttered on, so to speak. They knew that it, in the long run, it was good for the communities. Yeah, I think so, because I know we mixed a lot more with it. And of course, you know, they had their stores that you had to trade at. I mean, just wasn't that many places to shop, and you couldn't just jump in the car and go to Spokane or Seattle, because where were you going to get your gas stamps? When we were in the trailer, we had a stove that took white gas, and my husband had a 39 Ford Coupe V8. So we eating at the mess hall. I mean, we weren't really cooking, so we were putting the white gas allotment into this Ford, and it just about hopped up. Yeah, but you know, we never got enough to go any great distance.
Where did you go shopping locally?
Well, we get the bus and go to Pasco. There was a lot of nice stores in Pasco at that time. They were like men's stores. We're in department stores, men's stores and lady stores and children's stores, like every little small town has. Mm-hmm. And same way with Kennewick. And And we went to Yakima. And actually, we didn't shop like you would imagine in your time because, where are you going to put it? Because we're more or less transit, for quite a while. And also, there just weren't things available. Maybe they weren't rationed, but they just weren't available because the federal projects and the military had the priority. I was bumped from a train between L.A. and Fresno, and my brother from the 1st Marines came back from the Pacific. My sister, I was visiting in L.A. at the time, and I went to my sister's at Fresno, and we got bumped. We were going to Frisco, and he was coming in at Frisco. Well, actually, he came into San Diego, where the Marine base was at Camp Pendleton, but then he got a ride with somebody up to San Francisco. And when he was overseas, he was on a Brownie automatic rifle, BAR, and it's a 2-man thing. And he had promised his buddies that if anybody was lost, he would visit their next of kin. And he had a list of 22 names in the 4+ years that he was in the 1st Marines that he lost. That could have been him. And 2 of them were in San Francisco, and so that's why he ended up in San Francisco. So we picked him up, came to my place, and stayed about a month. And then he went all around the country, visited these next of kin that he'd promised.
So, overall, how would you describe your years working at Hanford?
Oh, I think it was a good thing. I think it was good for us. I learned a lot, did a lot of different type of jobs, and the climate was much better than Des Moines, Iowa, I'll tell you. And and the companies overall have been good to us. We were with DuPont first, then General Electric, and then United Nuclear. And it's been very broadening, I'll say that. We met people from all over, just all over. And allowed us to raise our family and have a nice home and a good retirement. And I would do it over again. Not at this age, but at 21 it was easy. Yeah.
Is there anything else that stands out in your mind from your time working at Hanford, or anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to talk about? Or?
Well, it wasn't all as stringent as it sounds. We just kind of laughed about a lot of it. Of course, we really aren't allowed to criticize much because, it just wasn't nice to do that with the war on. I had 4 brothers in the service, and my dad had been in the Navy in World War I. And you just kind of, after Pearl Harbor, the people supported the government very, very well. Before that, when England was in the midst of it, and there was back and forth about whether the United States would get into it, and it was really, there was no question about it after Pearl Harbor. And so most people felt we were attacked, and they felt you had to do what you had to do. I've never supported a war since then. I guess because we weren't attacked, but I feel now that we've been attacked again with the 9/11, I think, which took as many people as Pearl Harbor. I think Pearl Harbor was about 2,500 or something like that. That other one, the Pentagon and the Pennsylvania field, I think it's about 3,000. Yeah, overall, I know there was critics, primarily over on the west side, and I know they visited over here, and they have no idea that we have an operating nuclear reactor out here on the edge of town. And just like my friend in California, we had some friends in California so anti-nuclear and everything, and so I looked it up and I found out the time that he was talking about that there were 19 operating in California alone, not alone, over 100 in the United States. And that was probably 25, 30 years ago. And he was so surprised to think, he just thought like there might be one that blew up somewhere or other, but it just wasn't needed. It wasn't really producing that much. But now you stop to think, if they shut down all those, like you see outside of Phoenix in these large cities, what would we do? Where would we get the oil or the gas or for alternate fuel? Because the populations have grown, the industries have grown. Yeah, I know. I realize there's a lot of critics. I know they come over here expecting to see us glow in the dark. But, they don't mind hooking up to it whenever they get a chance. But, of course, they shut it down in Oregon, shut the one they had down in Oregon, and they stopped building the ones they were building on the other side at Elma. So I don't think they realize how dependent we are. But the same way there's critics about the dam and what's cheaper than hydropower. But on the other hand, you go to California or Arizona and they're paying 15, 16 cents per kilowatt. We're paying 6.5 for our electric heating here. So they're envious in a way. I think a lot of us envy.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in today. And
well, you're welcome.
For sharing your experiences at Hanford. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're a very good interviewer.